The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening, and David could barely see through his windshield wipers. His old Honda was making that weird noise again, the one that meant another expensive repair he couldn't afford. He gripped the steering, wheel tighter as he drove down the empty highway, thinking about the meeting he'd just left. Another rejection, another "we'll call you back," that really meant, don't hold your breath. David had walked into that office building with such hope 3 hours ago. His construction company proposal was solid, his references were good, and he'd practiced his pitch 100 times in the mirror. But the moment he sat down across from those 3 men in expensive suits, he could feel their doubt. They looked at his worn dress shoes and questioned every number in his budget twice. "We'll be in touch, Mr. Johnson," the lead investor had said, not even bothering to stand up when David left. He knew that tone. He'd heard it too many times before. Now David was driving home to his small apartment, wondering how he was going to pay next month's rent. His construction business was supposed to be his way out of financial struggle, but 3 years in, he was still scraping by. The company had potential, real potential, but banks wouldn't lend to him, and investors kept passing him over. His business account was down to $247, and his landlord had already called twice this week. The highway was nearly empty except for a few trucks heading south. David had the radio on low, listening to some talk show. Host complain about the economy. Easy to complain when you're making 6 figures, David thought. Try running a small business when nobody wants to give you a real chance. That's when he saw her. A woman was standing on the side of the road about a quarter mile ahead, waving her arms frantically at passing cars. She was completely soaked from the rain, her long dark hair stuck to her face. Even from a distance, David could see she was in trouble. His first instinct was to slow down and help, but then he hesitated. It was almost 10 at night, and this stretch of highway wasn't exactly known for being safe. But as he got closer, he could see her more clearly. She was young, maybe in her late 20s, wearing what looked like expensive clothes that were now ruined by the rain. Her white blouse was see-through from the water, and she had her arms wrapped around herself, shivering. She looked genuinely terrified, not like someone trying to run a scam. David's mother had always taught him to help people when they needed it. "You never know when you might need help yourself," she used to say. Even though money was tight and trust was hard to come by these days, he couldn't just drive past someone who looked that desperate. He pulled over about 20 feet ahead of where she was standing and put his hazard lights on. Through his rearview mirror, he watched her run toward his car, stumbling a little in what looked like designer heels that definitely weren't made for running on wet pavement. David rolled down his passenger window as she approached. "You okay? What happened?" "Oh, thank God," she said, breathing heavily. "I've been out here for over an hour. My car, it broke down, and my phone died. I just need to get to the nearest bus station if that's possible." Her voice was educated, refined, not what David expected from someone stranded on this particular stretch of highway. Most people around here talked with the local accent, but she sounded like she was from somewhere up north, maybe New York or Boston. "Where's your car?" David asked, looking around. He didn't see any broken-down vehicles nearby. She hesitated for just a moment. "It's back there about a mile. I started walking because I was getting scared waiting alone in the dark." Something about her story didn't quite add up. If her car was only a mile back, why hadn't any of the trucks that passed by stopped to help her there? And why walk a mile in expensive heels during a rainstorm? But looking at her standing there shivering and clearly frightened, David pushed his doubts aside. "Get in," he said, unlocking the passenger door. "You're going to catch pneumonia standing out there." She climbed into his car gratefully, bringing the smell of rain and expensive perfume with her. "Thank you so much. I'm Kelly, by the way." "David. And don't mention it." He turned up the heat and handed her a towel from his back seat. "There's a Greyhound station about 30 minutes from here. That work for you?" "Perfect. I just need to get out of town tonight." She wrapped the towel around her shoulders and stopped shivering as much. "I really can't thank you enough for stopping. Most people just drove right past me." As David pulled back onto the highway, he glanced over at his passenger. Now that she was in better light, He could see that her clothes were definitely expensive. The blouse might have been ruined by rain, but it was clearly high-quality fabric. Her jewelry was real too, a simple gold necklace and earrings that looked like they cost more than David made in a month. "So what brings you out to this part of nowhere?" David asked, trying to make conversation. "Most people with cars nice. Enough to break down around here are just passing through." Kelly looked out the passenger window. "I was visiting someone. Things didn't go as planned, so I decided to head home early." "Where's home?" Another hesitation. "Up north. My sister lives in Pennsylvania. I'm going to stay with her for a while." David could tell she didn't want to talk about her situation, so he didn't push. Instead, he found himself opening up about his own problems. Maybe it was because she was a stranger he'd probably never see again, or maybe it was because the day had been so disappointing that he needed to talk to someone. "This has been one hell of a day," he said, shaking his head. "Had a big meeting with some potential investors for my construction company. Thought this might be the break I've been waiting for. I take it didn't go well?" "You could say that. They basically told me my numbers were too optimistic and my experience was too limited. Which is funny, because I've been doing construction work since I was 16. Started with my dad's crew during summers, learned everything from the ground up." Kelly turned to look at him with interest. "What kind of construction does your company do?" "Residential mostly. Small renovations, some new builds. I've got a good crew and I can afford to pay them. The problem is getting enough steady work to keep everyone busy. These big developers get all the major contracts and the smaller jobs barely cover expenses. Have you tried partnering with other small contractors? Sometimes pooling resources can help you bid on bigger projects." David was surprised by the suggestion. It was actually a smart idea, something he'd considered, but never really explored seriously. "You know something about construction?" "I know something about business," Kelly said carefully. "What's stopping you from growing the company?" "Money mainly, and connections. This business runs on relationships, and most of the people with real money don't look twice at guys like me. They see a young black contractor and assume I'm either unreliable or inexperienced, even when my work speaks for itself." Kelly was quiet for a moment. "That must be incredibly frustrating." "It is. But you keep pushing, you know? My dad always said that building something worthwhile takes time. He died when I was 22, left me the business, and about $50,000 in debt. Took me 3 years just to get out of the hole he left behind. I'm sorry about your father." "Thanks. He was a good man, just not great with money. Trusted the wrong people, made some bad deals. But he taught me how to work hard and treat people right. I figure if I keep doing that, eventually things will turn around." They drove in comfortable silence for a while. David noticed that Kelly kept checking her phone, even though she'd said it was dead. Every few minutes, she'd glance at the screen and then put it face down on her lap. When it buzzed with what sounded like a text message, she quickly turned it off completely. "Everything okay?" David asked. "Fine. Just family stuff." When they reached the bus station, David was surprised to find it mostly empty. The ticket counter was closed, and according to the schedule posted on the window, the last bus north had left 2 hours ago. "Looks like you're stuck until morning," David said. "Next bus to Pennsylvania doesn't leave until 8 a.m. Kelly stared at the schedule with a look that seemed more panicked than disappointed. "Is there a hotel nearby?" "There's a motel about 5 minutes from here, but honestly, it's not the kind of place I'd recommend to anyone, especially a woman traveling alone. It's pretty rough." Kelly bit her lip, clearly trying to figure out her options. She pulled out her phone, then remembered she'd turned it off and seemed reluctant to turn it back on. David found himself making an offer he hadn't planned on. "Look, I know this might sound crazy since we just met, but I've got a couch in my apartment. It's not much, but it's safe and clean. You can stay there tonight and catch the bus in the morning." Kelly looked at him carefully, probably trying to decide if she could trust him. David realized how his offer might sound. A strange man picking up a stranded woman and inviting her home. But something about her situation felt genuinely desperate, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she needed help beyond just a ride to the bus station. "I promise I'm not some creep," David added quickly. I just know what it's like to be stuck in a bad situation with limited options. My mom would kill me if she found out I left someone stranded at a bus station overnight. After a long moment, Kelly nodded slowly. Okay, thank you. David's apartment was small, but it was clean and organized. Kelly looked around as they walked in, taking in the simple furniture and the stack of construction blueprints on the kitchen table. The place felt lived in, but not messy, like someone who worked hard and didn't have much time for decorating. It's not much, David said, hanging his wet jacket on a chair. But the couch pulls out into a bed, and there's clean sheets in the closet. It's perfect, Kelly said, and she seemed to mean it. You have no idea how grateful I am. David went to the kitchen and put on a pot of coffee. You hungry? I've got some leftover pizza in the fridge, or I could make some sandwiches. Coffee. Sounds amazing right now. Kelly sat down at the small kitchen table, still wrapped in the towel he'd given her. She looked at the blueprints spread out in front of her. Are these yours? Yeah, a project I've been working on. It's a design for affordable housing units. Small, but efficient. David brought over 2 mugs of coffee and sat across from her. I keep thinking if I could just get someone to take a chance on the concept, it could really help families who can't afford regular apartments. Kelly studied the drawings carefully. David watched her eyes move across the plans, and he could tell she actually understood what she was looking at. Most people just saw lines and numbers, but Kelly seemed to grasp the layout and design concepts. This is really smart, she said finally. You've maximized the space without making it feel cramped. And these cost estimates, how did you calculate the materials? David was surprised by her questions. They weren't the kind of casual comments most people made when looking at blueprints. I spent months researching suppliers and getting quotes. The trick is buying in bulk and finding materials that are durable but not overpriced. What about labor costs? I've got a crew of 5 guys who've been with me for 2 years. They're good workers, reliable. If I could guarantee them steady work, they'd probably take a small pay cut just for the security. Kelly nodded thoughtfully. Have you considered presenting this to City Council? A lot of municipalities are looking for creative solutions to housing shortages. I've thought about it, but I don't really know how to approach government contracts. That's a whole different world from the renovation work I usually do. They talked for another hour about David's business plans and challenges. Kelly asked insightful questions about cash flow, client relations, and growth strategies. Her suggestions were practical and showed a deep understanding of how businesses operated. David found himself more engaged in business discussion than he'd been in months. You seem to know a lot about this stuff, David said eventually. What kind of work do you do? Kelly's face changed slightly. I used to work in consulting. Corporate strategy mostly. But I'm between jobs right now. Is that why you're going to your sister's place? Something like that. Kelly stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Sometimes you need to step away from everything and figure out what you really want to do with your life. David could sense there was more to the story, but he didn't push. Everyone had their reasons for keeping things private. Around midnight, Kelly's phone started buzzing again. She'd turned it back on to check the time, and now it was lighting up with calls and text messages. She quickly turned it off again, but not before David noticed her hands were shaking. Everything okay? He asked. Fine, just some people I don't want to talk to right now. David set up the couch bed for Kelly and gave her one of his clean t-shirts to sleep in since her clothes were still damp. Bathroom's down the hall. Towels are in the cabinet. Help yourself to anything in the kitchen if you get hungry. David, Kelly said as he was heading to his bedroom. Thank you for everything. You didn't have to help me, and most people wouldn't have. Most people are better than you think. They just don't always get the chance to show it. The next morning, David woke up to the smell of bacon and eggs. He walked into the kitchen to find Kelly cooking breakfast, wearing his oversized t-shirt and a pair of his sweatpants that she'd rolled up at the waist. I hope you don't mind, she said, flipping an egg. I found some groceries in your fridge and thought I'd make breakfast as a thank you. Where did the bacon come from? I definitely didn't have bacon yesterday. Kelly paused for just a moment. I ran to the corner store early this morning. Wanted to contribute something. David looked out the window. The corner store was 6 blocks away, and it didn't open until 7 a.m. It was only 6:30 now, but Kelly had already turned back to the stove and he decided not to question it. Over breakfast, Kelly noticed the stack of bills on David's counter. "Is that your business paperwork?" "Unfortunately. My landlord wants to meet with me this afternoon about the overdue rent on my office space. I'm 3 months behind and he's threatening to terminate the lease." "How much do you owe?" $4,500. Might as well be $45,000 with the way my bank account looks right now. Kelly was quiet for a moment. "What if I came with you to the meeting?" David looked at her in surprise. "Why would you want to do that?" "I told you I used to work in consulting. I've sat through hundreds of landlord negotiations. Sometimes having a neutral third party there can help keep things professional. I don't know. This guy can be pretty rough and it's not really your problem." "Maybe not, but you helped me when I needed it. Let me try to help you." That afternoon, they drove to David's office building. The landlord, Mr. Peterson, was a heavy-set man in his 60s who owned several commercial properties around town. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and David had always gotten along with him until the rent payments started getting late. "Johnson," Peterson said as they walked into his office, "I hope you've got good news for me because I've already had 3 people ask about your space this week." "Mr. Peterson, this is Kelly. She's a business consultant who's been helping me review my finances." Kelly stepped forward and shook Peterson's hand with a confidence that impressed David. "Mr. Peterson, thank you for taking the time to meet with us. I know David's situation isn't ideal, but I think we can work out something that benefits everyone." For the next 30 minutes, Kelly negotiated with Peterson like she'd been doing it her whole life. She acknowledged David's payment delays, but presented a realistic plan for catching up on the rent. More importantly, she outlined David's potential for growth and positioned him as a valuable long-term tenant rather than a risk. What if David paid half the outstanding balance today and then paid the other half plus current rent over the next 2 months? Kelly suggested. That would give him breathing room to focus on landing the contracts he needs while ensuring you get paid in full. Peterson considered this. He doesn't have half the balance. If he did, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Actually, Kelly said, David has been so focused on keeping his crew paid and his projects running that he hasn't optimized his receivables. He's got about $3,000 in outstanding invoices that should be collected within the next 2 weeks. David stared at Kelly. He did have those outstanding invoices, but he'd never mentioned them to her. How did she know about his accounts receivable? Peterson seemed impressed by Kelly's professional approach. You really think he can get current in 2 months? I'm confident he can. David's got a solid reputation and quality work. He just needs a chance to stabilize his cash flow. By the end of the meeting, Peterson had agreed to Kelly's proposal. David would pay $2,200 within 2 weeks and the remaining balance over the following month. It wasn't easy, but it was manageable and it saved his office space. Walking back to the car, David was amazed. How did you do that? Peterson's usually impossible to negotiate with. You just have to understand what motivates people. He doesn't want to evict you and find a new tenant. He wants his money and some assurance that this won't happen again. But how did you know about my outstanding invoices? I never told you those numbers. Kelly hesitated. I noticed some of the paperwork on your kitchen table this morning. I wasn't snooping, but I could see you had invoices that hadn't been paid yet. It was a reasonable explanation, but David had the feeling Kelly was more observant than most people. There was something about the way she handled business situations that suggested real experience, not just casual knowledge. That evening, as they sat in David's apartment eating takeout Chinese food, Kelly's phone started buzzing again. This time she let it ring, but David could see the stress on her face. Kelly, he said gently, I don't know what's going on in your life and you don't have to tell me. But if you're in some kind of trouble, maybe there's something I can do to help. Kelly looked at him for a long moment. You've already done more than enough. Some problems can't be solved by kindness. Maybe not. But sometimes talking about problems makes them easier to handle. Kelly set down her food and walked to the window again. What if I told you that everything you think you know about me is wrong? That I'm not who I pretended to be? I'd say that everybody pretends to be someone else sometimes. The question is whether the person you really are is someone I should be worried about. Kelly turned back to face him. I'm not dangerous if that's what you're asking, but I am in trouble. Big trouble. David woke up the next morning to the sound of running water and the smell of fresh coffee. For a moment, he forgot that Kelly was still there, and the domestic sounds made his small apartment feel less lonely than it had in months. He'd been living alone for 2 years now, ever since his last relationship ended, and he'd gotten used to quiet mornings and instant coffee. When he walked into the kitchen, Kelly was already dressed in her clothes from 2 days ago, which she'd somehow managed to clean and press. She'd also organized his scattered business papers into neat piles and had his laptop open on the table. "Morning," she said, handing him a cup of coffee that was perfectly made. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of looking at your business proposal, the one you mentioned getting rejected on." David sat down and looked at his laptop screen. Kelly had opened his presentation and made notes in the margins. Her handwriting was neat and precise, like someone who was used to taking important notes in meetings. "What do you think?" David asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear another critique of his work. "I think it's good. Really good. But I also think I know why you're getting rejected." Kelly pointed to several slides. "Your numbers are conservative, your timeline is realistic, and your experience is solid. The problem isn't your business plan." "Then what is it?" Kelly hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. "You're presenting this like someone who's asking for permission instead of someone who's offering an opportunity. These investors aren't doing you a favor by giving you money. You're giving them a chance to make money with you." David had never thought about it that way. Every meeting he'd been to, he'd felt like he was begging for help. "So what should I do differently?" "Confidence and presentation. You need to walk into that room like you already know you're going to succeed, and they'd be crazy not to be part of it." Kelly pulled up another slide. "Also, you need to emphasize the market demand more. Housing shortage isn't just a problem. It's an opportunity. You're not just building houses, you're solving a crisis." They spent the next hour going through David's entire presentation. Kelly's suggestions were detailed and professional, the kind of advice that usually cost hundreds of dollars from business consultants. She knew terms and strategies that David had never heard of, and she explained them in ways that made sense. "Have you ever thought about applying for government contracts?" Kelly asked. "With your affordable housing concept, you might qualify for several federal programs." "I wouldn't even know where to start with that." "I could help you research it. There are databases of open contracts, and application processes aren't as complicated as people think." David studied Kelly's face. "You really know a lot about this stuff. What kind of consulting did you say you used to do?" Kelly's expression changed, becoming more guarded. "Corporate strategy. Mergers and acquisitions mostly. I worked with companies that were looking to expand or restructure." "That sounds like big money work." It was. Kelly closed the laptop and stood up. "But that's not what I do anymore." David could tell the conversation was making Kelly uncomfortable, so he changed the subject. "I need to run some errands today. Pick up materials for a small job I'm starting next week. Want to come along? Might be better than sitting here all day." Kelly agreed, and they spent the morning driving around to different suppliers. David noticed that Kelly seemed more relaxed when they were out of the apartment, but she kept checking her phone and looking over her shoulder in parking lots. At the lumber yard, Kelly impressed the sales manager by asking detailed questions about wood grades and pricing structures. At the hardware store, she suggested bulk purchasing strategies that could save David money on future orders. By lunchtime, David was starting to wonder if Kelly had some kind of photographic memory for business information. "You're either the smartest person I've ever met or you've been in business a lot longer than you're letting on," David said as they sat in a diner eating burgers. Kelly smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Maybe a little of both." That afternoon, David had to meet with a potential client about a kitchen renovation. Kelly asked to come along, saying she was curious about his work process. The client, Mrs. Rodriguez, was an elderly woman who wanted to update her kitchen, but was worried about the cost. David gave his usual estimate and timeline, but then Kelly stepped in with suggestions about financing options and tax credits for home improvements. She also pointed out ways to phase the renovation to spread out costs over several months. Mrs. Rodriguez was impressed and agreed to hire David on the spot. Walking back to the car, David shook his head in amazement. "Okay, seriously. Who are you?" That wasn't beginner's luck in there, you knew exactly what to say. Kelly stopped walking and turned to face him. "David, there are things about my situation that I can't explain right now, but I promise you I'm not trying to deceive you or take advantage of you. Are you in some kind of legal trouble? It's complicated. Are you married? Running from an abusive husband or something?" "No, nothing like that." Kelly looked around the parking lot nervously. "Can we just go back to your place? I'll try to explain some of it, but not here." On the drive home, Kelly was quiet and kept checking the mirrors. David was starting to get genuinely worried about what kind of situation he'd gotten involved in. Kelly was obviously intelligent and well-educated, but she was also clearly running from something serious. Back at the apartment, Kelly sat on the couch while David made dinner. She had her phone in her hands, turning it over and over like she was trying to decide whether to make a call. "Kelly," David said, bringing over 2 plates of spaghetti. "Talk to me. What's going on?" Kelly took a deep breath. "What I'm about to tell you might sound crazy and it might make you want me to leave. I'll understand if you do. Try me. My real name isn't Kelly, and I'm not from Pennsylvania." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I'm from Connecticut. My family has money. A lot of money." David wasn't entirely surprised by this revelation. Kelly's clothes, her knowledge, her mannerisms, they all suggested wealth and education. "Okay," he said. "So why are you pretending to be someone else?" "Because 3 months ago I discovered something about my family's business that I wasn't supposed to know. Something illegal and dangerous. When I tried to do the right thing about it, my own family turned against me." Kelly's voice was shaking. "Now, they had me committed to a private psychiatric facility, claiming I was having a mental breakdown. They froze all my accounts and told everyone I was delusional. The plan was to keep me locked up until I agreed to stay quiet about what I'd discovered." David felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of business does your family run?" "Pharmaceuticals. We manufacture drugs and medical devices. But what I found out is that we've been conducting illegal drug trials in developing countries. Testing experimental medications on people who don't understand what they're agreeing to. People have died, David. Children have died." The weight of what Kelly was telling him started to sink in. "And you tried to expose this?" "I tried to go to the authorities. But my family has connections everywhere, police, politicians, judges. They made me look like an unstable rich girl who was having delusions about her family's perfectly legitimate business." "So you escaped from this facility?" Kelly nodded. 3 weeks ago. I've been moving around ever since, trying to stay ahead of the private investigators they hired to find me. I was heading to meet someone who said they could help me get my story to the right people, but I got scared and ran instead." David sat back in his chair, trying to process everything. "The phone calls, the people you don't want to talk to, probably my family's people trying to track me down. They've been calling from different numbers trying to get me to answer. Kelly, if what you're saying is true, you're in real danger. These people aren't going to just give up." "I know. That's why I have to leave tomorrow. I've already put you at risk by staying here this long." David looked at Kelly. Really looked at her. The fear in her eyes was real. The stress and exhaustion were genuine. Whether her story was completely true or not, she was definitely running from something serious. "What's your plan?" he asked. "I don't have one. I've been living day to day, trying to stay invisible. I have some cash hidden away, but it won't last much longer." "What about going to the FBI or the media?" "I've tried. Without proof, it's just my word against a multi-billion-dollar company with unlimited legal resources, and they've already established that I'm mentally unstable." David stood up and started pacing around his small living room. "There has to be something we can do, some way to get you the help you need." "We?" Kelly looked at him in surprise. David, this isn't your fight. You've already done more than enough by helping me these past few days. Maybe it's not my fight, but it's the right fight. If what you're saying is true, people are getting hurt while your family makes money. That's not something you just walk away from. Kelly's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what you'd be up against. These people have unlimited resources and no conscience. They'll destroy anyone who gets in their way. Then we better be smarter than they are. David sat back down across from Kelly. Look, I don't have money or connections like your family does. David couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Kelly's story and wondering if he was making a huge mistake by getting involved. Around 3 a.m, he got up to get a glass of water and noticed Kelly sitting by the window, staring out at the street. Can't sleep either? He asked quietly. Kelly jumped at the sound of his voice. Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you. I keep thinking I see cars that have been following me. David looked out the window. The street was empty except for a few parked cars that belonged to his neighbors. Everything looks normal to me. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. When you're running scared for weeks, every shadow starts to look threatening. David sat down beside her. Kelly, I've been thinking about what you told me, about your family and the pharmaceutical company. Do you have any proof of what they were doing? Kelly was quiet for a moment. I took some documents before they had me committed. Financial records, test results, email chains between executives. I hid them in a safety deposit box before everything went wrong. That's something. If we could get those documents to the right people. It's not that simple. The safety deposit box is in Connecticut, at a bank where my family has connections. The moment I show up there, they'll know exactly where I am. David thought about this. What if someone else went to get them? Someone they wouldn't recognize? You can't access a safety deposit box without the owner being present. It's federal law. They sat in silence for a while, watching the empty street. David was starting to understand why Kelly felt so trapped. She had evidence that could expose her family's crimes, but she couldn't get to it without putting herself in immediate danger. The next morning, David decided to do some research of his own. While Kelly showered, he used his laptop to search for information about pharmaceutical companies and illegal drug trials. What he found made his stomach turn. There were dozens of news articles about companies testing experimental drugs in poor countries, often without proper consent or safety protocols. The profits were enormous, and the penalties were usually just fines that companies could easily afford. But David also found stories about whistleblowers who had successfully exposed these practices, and some of them had gotten help from investigative journalists and federal agencies. When Kelly came out of the bathroom, David showed her what he'd found. Look at this. There's a reporter named Amanda Chen who's written several articles about pharmaceutical corruption. She works for a major newspaper and has connections with federal investigators. Kelly read the articles carefully. I remember reading some of these pieces when they first came out. She's good, and she's not afraid to take on big companies. Maybe we should try to contact her. And tell her what? That I'm a crazy rich girl with a story about my family's business? She probably gets calls from people like that every week. David pulled up another article. What about this FBI task force? They specialize in healthcare fraud and corporate corruption. If you could get your evidence to them. David, you're not understanding the situation. My family has spent millions of dollars making me look like an unreliable witness. They have doctors who will testify that I'm mentally unstable, security footage of me acting erratically before I escaped, and a whole narrative about how I've always been jealous of my father's success. Kelly stood up and started pacing around the small living room. Even if I could prove that the documents are real, they'd just claim I stole them and altered them to get revenge on my family. David could see the frustration and hopelessness in Kelly's face. She'd been carrying this burden alone for months, and every path forward seemed blocked. What if we didn't go to them directly? David suggested. What if we found a way to get the evidence to someone anonymously? How would that work? I don't know yet, but there has to be a way to get the truth out without putting you in the line of fire. That afternoon, David had to leave for a construction job across town. He was reluctant to leave Kelly alone, but he needed the work and couldn't afford to cancel on a client. I'll be back by 6, he told Kelly. Keep the door locked and don't answer it for anyone. I'll be fine. I've been hiding for weeks. I know how to stay invisible. But Kelly wasn't fine. Around 2 o'clock, she noticed the same black sedan that had been parked across the street that morning. It had left when David went to work, but now it was back and she could see someone sitting inside. Her phone started ringing again. Unknown number. She let it go to voicemail, but when she checked the message, her blood ran cold. Alexandra, this is Dr. Morrison from the Riverside Treatment Center. We're very concerned about your well-being and your family is desperate to help you. Please call us back so we can arrange for you to receive the medical care you need. Alexandra? They were using her real name, which meant they knew exactly where she was. Kelly grabbed her purse and the few belongings she'd accumulated over the past few days. She had to leave immediately, before David came home and got caught up in whatever was about to happen. But as she looked out the window again, she saw a second car had joined the first one. They were positioned so they could see both the front and back exits of David's building. She was trapped. Kelly tried calling David, but his phone went straight to voicemail. He was probably in a loud construction site where he couldn't hear his phone. She left a message anyway. David, they found me. There are cars outside your building and they're using my real name. I'm going to try to get out, but if something happens to me, I want you to know that everything I told you was true, and thank you for believing me when no one else would. Kelly spent the next hour trying to figure out an escape plan. The building had a back exit that led to an alley, but one of the cars had a clear view of it. There was also a basement laundry, room with a window that opened onto the street, but she'd have to go through the main lobby to get there. Around 4 o'clock, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside David's apartment. Slow, deliberate footsteps that stopped right outside his door. Kelly held her breath as someone knocked. Ms. Thornton, we know you're in there. We're here to help you. The voice was professional but firm. Not threatening exactly, but not friendly either. Your family is very worried about you. You've been off your medication for weeks now, and Dr. Morrison believes you may be experiencing delusions again. Kelly didn't answer. She knew that engaging with them would only make things worse. We're not going away, Ms. Thornton. We can wait here all day if necessary, but it would be much easier for everyone if you just opened the door. That's when Kelly heard David's key in the lock. Her heart stopped as she realized he was walking into a trap. The men in the hallway would see him, and they'd know he was the one who had been helping her. David would become a target too. Kelly made a split-second decision. She opened the window in David's bedroom and called out to the street below. I'm here. I'm the one you're looking for. The men in the hallway immediately rushed toward the bedroom, but Kelly had already climbed out onto the fire escape. She could see David entering the building lobby below, unaware of what was happening upstairs. Kelly made it down 2 flights of the fire escape before one of the men appeared at David's bedroom window. Ms. Thornton, please stop. You're going to hurt yourself. But Kelly wasn't stopping. She jumped from the fire escape to the roof of a parked van and then rolled to the ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed, but she kept running. Behind her, she could hear the men shouting into their radios, coordinating their pursuit. Car engines started up, and she knew she had only minutes before they caught up with her. Kelly limped through the alley behind David's building, trying to put as much distance as possible between herself and the men who were chasing her. But she also knew she couldn't run forever. She was injured, exhausted, and running out of places to hide. That's when she saw David's construction truck turning into the alley. He must have gotten her voicemail and come looking for her. David pulled up beside her and threw open the passenger door. Get in! Kelly didn't need to be told twice. She jumped into the truck just as the black sedan turned into the alley behind them. Hold on, David said, and pressed the accelerator to the floor. For the next 20 minutes, David used his knowledge of the city's construction sites and back roads to stay ahead of their pursuers. He drove through areas where his truck could go, but sedans couldn't follow, using shortcuts he'd learned from years of hauling materials around town. Eventually, they lost the cars in a maze of industrial buildings near the river. David pulled into an abandoned warehouse district and parked behind a pile of construction debris. Are you okay? He asked, looking at Kelly's scraped hands and swollen ankle. I think so. But David, they know about you now. They saw you help me escape. You're in danger too. David was quiet for a moment, processing what had just happened. What did they want? Were they police? Private security. My family hires them to handle situations that regular law enforcement can't touch. They were going to take me back to the psychiatric facility. Against your will? They have legal guardianship papers. According to the court system, I'm mentally incompetent and my family has the right to make medical decisions for me. David stared at her in amazement. They can just do that? Take away your rights as an adult? David drove to an old construction site on the outskirts of town where his crew had worked 6 months earlier. The building was half-finished and abandoned after the developer ran out of money. It was the perfect place to hide while they figured out their next move. We can't stay here forever, Kelly said as they settled into what would have been an office space. Those men won't give up and now they know you're involved. David was looking at his phone, scrolling through news websites. Maybe we don't have to hide. Look at this. He showed Kelly an article about a congressional hearing on pharmaceutical safety that was scheduled for the following week. Senator Williams is heading up an investigation into drug testing practices. She's been pushing for stronger oversight for years. David looked up at Kelly. What if we could get your evidence to her committee? Kelly read the article carefully. She's legitimate. I've seen her speak before about corporate accountability. But how would we even contact her office? And why would they believe us? Because we're not going to just call and tell them a story. We're going to give them something they can't ignore. David had an idea, but it was risky. You said your evidence is in a safety deposit box in Connecticut. What if we could get someone else to access it legally? I told you that's impossible. You have to be the account holder. Not if the account holder gives someone else power of attorney. Kelly shook her head. I can't sign legal documents right now. My family would use that to track me down immediately. What? About someone who already has power of attorney? Someone your family doesn't know about? Kelly looked confused. I don't have anyone like that. David smiled. You do now. My cousin Jake is a lawyer in Hartford. He specializes in family law and estate planning. If we can get you to his office safely, he might be able to help us find a legal way to access your evidence. David, I can't drag your family into this. Jake's been fighting powerful people his whole career. He became a lawyer because he wanted to help people who couldn't help themselves. Trust me, he'll want to be involved. Over the next few hours, David called in favors from every contact he had in the construction business. His friend Tony had a delivery truck that could get them to Connecticut without being spotted. His former supervisor Mike knew back roads that avoided major highways. His buddy Carlos had a cousin who worked at a hotel near Hartford, where they could stay without using credit cards. You have a lot of friends, Kelly observed as David made another call. Construction is a tight community. We look out for each other because we have to. Nobody else will. That evening, they began their journey to Connecticut. Tony's delivery truck was perfect cover, just another commercial vehicle on the road. Kelly wore a baseball cap and work clothes that David had borrowed from his crew, and she looked nothing like the wealthy heiress her family was searching for. During the long drive, Kelly opened up more about her family and the pharmaceutical company. My father built that business from nothing. When I was growing up, I thought he was a hero. He talked about saving lives and making medicine affordable for people who needed it. When did you find out the truth? Last year. I was working in the corporate office, learning the business so I could eventually take over. I started noticing discrepancies in our international operations, expenses that didn't match the reports, facilities in countries where we weren't supposed to have operations. Kelly stared out the truck window at the passing landscape. When I started asking questions, everyone told me I was being too curious, but I couldn't let it go. So I started investigating on my own. What did you find? Test facilities in Bangladesh, Guatemala, Nigeria, places where people are desperate for medical care and don't ask too many questions about experimental treatments. We were paying local clinics to recruit patients for drug trials, but the patients didn't understand what they were signing up for. David felt sick thinking about it. How many people were hurt? Hundreds, maybe thousands. The drugs we were testing weren't ready for human trials, but my father's company needed quick results to satisfy investors, so they found places where they could test on people without proper oversight. And when you tried to expose this, your family had you committed. My father said I was having a breakdown, that the stress of learning about the business was too much for me. He had 3 doctors sign papers saying I was mentally unstable and needed immediate psychiatric care. They reached Hartford at 2 in the morning and checked into the small hotel Carlos had recommended. The next morning, they met with David's cousin Jake at his law office. Jake Williams was a thin man in his 40s with graying hair and sharp eyes. He listened to Kelly's story without interruption, taking notes and asking occasional questions. "This is complicated," Jake said when Kelly finished explaining her situation. "Your family has legal guardianship, which means any actions you take could be challenged in court. But there might be a way around it." Jake pulled out several law books and spent an hour researching precedents. "There's a provision in Connecticut law that allows someone to challenge their own guardianship if they can demonstrate competency. If we can get you in front of the right judge, you might be able to regain control of your legal rights." "How long would that take?" "Normally several months. But if we can demonstrate that this is an emergency situation involving public safety, we might be able to expedite the process." Jake made several phone calls to judges and court clerks he knew. By noon, he had managed to schedule an emergency hearing for the following day. "Judge Martinez is fair and doesn't like it when powerful families abuse the legal system," Jake explained. "If you can present your case clearly and demonstrate that you're not mentally unstable, she might be willing to restore your rights temporarily." That night, they prepared for the hearing. Kelly practiced explaining her situation in simple, clear terms while David and Jake helped her organize the evidence she could present without accessing the safety deposit box. The hearing the next morning was tense. Kelly's family had sent 3 lawyers to oppose her petition, and they argued that she was having a manic episode and couldn't be trusted to make rational decisions. But Kelly was prepared. She spoke calmly and logically about her discoveries at the pharmaceutical company, providing specific dates, locations, and financial figures that she had memorized. She explained why she had felt it necessary to escape from the psychiatric facility and why she believed her family was using the legal system to silence her. Judge Martinez asked tough questions, but Kelly answered them all with composure and intelligence. After an hour of testimony, the judge made her decision. "While I have concerns about the circumstances of Ms. Thornton's original commitment, she has demonstrated clear competency today. I am temporarily restoring her legal rights, pending a full review of her guardianship case." With her rights restored, Kelly was able to access her safety deposit box that afternoon. The evidence she had hidden was even more damaging than David had expected. Financial records showing payments to illegal testing facilities, email chains between executives discussing ways to hide deaths during trials, and medical reports documenting serious side effects that had been covered up. Jake helped them contact Senator Williams's office, and within hours, federal investigators were reviewing Kelly's evidence. The story broke in the national news 2 days later, and within a week, Kelly's father and several other company executives had been arrested. The pharmaceutical company's stock price collapsed, and multiple lawsuits were filed on behalf of victims in the countries where illegal testing had occurred. Kelly testified before Congress about her family's crimes, and her courage in coming forward was praised by investigators and patient advocacy groups. But the story wasn't over. With her legal troubles resolved and her trust fund restored, Kelly had a decision to make about her future. She could have disappeared into a comfortable life somewhere far from the scandal, but instead, she chose to stay and fight. Kelly used her restored wealth to establish a foundation that provided legal aid to whistleblowers and supported victims of corporate medical abuse. She also became David's business partner, investing in his construction company and helping him expand into affordable housing development. 6 months later, Johnson Thornton Construction had completed its first affordable housing project, AED, complex of 50 small but well-designed homes for families who had been priced out of the regular housing market. David had hired 20 full-time employees and was bidding on government contracts across 3 states. "You know," David said as they stood looking at the completed housing complex, When I picked you up on that highway, I thought I was just helping a stranger get to a bus station. Kelly smiled. And I thought I was just trying to survive another day on the run. Funny how things work out. Think you'll stay in construction? For a while. I like building things that actually help people. It's a nice change from the corporate world. David watched families moving into their new homes, children playing in the small yards they had designed into each unit. My dad always said that building something worthwhile takes time. I think he would have liked what we're doing here. I think he would have liked you helping a stranger on the highway too. As the sun set over their first completed project,